Good morning, everybody. I know that video was kind of dorky, but it it serves a purpose for today. Um, Obviously, we're going to be talking about fruit today, right? Everybody have a good week? Yeah, I had a great week. Got to get out and ride yesterday. Had an amazing steak dinner, thanks to my buddy Wes. After working my butt off all day out at the ranch. Um, what? It was work. Did I bring my Bible up? Okay, so um, I'm finding a hard time getting going today. I don't know about you. I didn't want to get up this morning. I didn't want to get out of bed this morning. I didn't want to get off my couch this morning. I didn't want to get off that chair back there today. I was kind of praying that God would send somebody just to walk up on stage and speak for me today. It's just one of those mornings where you just want to. Maybe it's because yesterday was what, 85, 90 degrees, and today it's what, 20? Gotta love Oklahoma, right? Well, it don't feel like 56. I think the weatherman says 56, but feels like 20. I don't know about you, but it's cold. Um, I don't know if you guys remember when we were at the Christian church, my last sermon at the Christian church, I talked about um, Jesus being the vine and we're the branches. So today it's funny because I did this a year ago. It was a year ago that we were at the church, at the Christian church, and I spoke. And over the last year, it seems like God just works on you, and He changes you, and He changes your perspective on things, and He changes your perspective on how you see Scripture, and it happens constantly. Um, and I was reading this week, and in the Bible study I'm going through, it came up to John, and it was going over this story, and um, God really changed my view on this. So today I want to go a little bit deeper in what the meaning of John 14 is. I'm going to go ahead and read John 14 for you. Or actually, sorry, John 15. And it's called, Jesus is the True Vine. He says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of me that does not produce fruit, and He prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. And if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. When you provide much fruit, you are my true disciple. This brings great glory to my Father. How many of you have ever pruned a tree, or pruned a garden, or pruned flowers, or pruned something? When I was a kid, I remember this. It really impacted me. Me and my dad, I can't remember where we were. We were living in Mattoon, Illinois, and we were collecting up tree branches and cleaning up this yard, and we had a huge pile of grass and tree branches out there. And I remember we were throwing stuff on this pile, and all of a sudden, it burst into flames. And here I'm a little kid, and I'm amazed. I'm like, I can't believe what just happened. And looking back, my father probably had thrown some gas on there, and I didn't know it, and he probably lit it on fire without me knowing. But it was amazing. And over the years, that story has really stuck with me. And that thought of, I've always thought of it as, these tree limbs just burst into flames, all these dead trees, and it was like, what do they call that? spontaneous combustion. It was spontaneous combustion. It just happened. Um, and I don't know why, but when I read this and I think about the tree limbs being cut off and being pruned, they're thrown into a fire, and but this whole story goes even deeper than just what you see in the word itself. You see, in order to understand this story, I love the Bible. And a lot of people will take the New Testament and they will stick to the New Testament. And they say, well, I believe in Jesus. Jesus came. He abolished the Old Testament. He started anew. Everything's new in the New Testament. And I've been trying to show you guys that the Old Testament is connected to the New Testament in ways that you can never really understand the New Testament and understand what Jesus was doing unless you understand the Old Testament. So with saying that, Jesus starts out this. He says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. Now, we look at this as it's an illustration, right? We look at this story of an illustration of, and I've got a fake tree up here, kind of give you an idea of, Jesus is saying that he's the main branch, or he's the stem, he's the core, he's the vine. I don't have a vine to show you, or else we could go off that. And we look at this as an illustration of being part of Jesus, but it's so much more than that. You see, in the Old Testament, a lot of times, Israel was referred to as the vine. Israel was the vine. You see, God had set Israel up to be the vine. To be the vine that the branches come off. He had set them up to bring his word, to bring him to all the nations of the world. They were supposed to be the vine that all the branches would come off. But the problem with Israel is Israel got corrupted, right? Israel got corrupted by the world around it and the things around it, and they turned their back on God. They continually sinned against God. And there's one section in Joel. How many of you have ever read Joel? How many even know where Joel is in the Bible? I was trying to, this is the first, I know where Joel is, but this is the first time I've actually had to go to the front of my Bible. Well, not first time, but first time since I've been a pastor, and look up the table of contents to find Joel. It's such a small chapter. It's 4 pages, if that. But Joel was a minor prophet. And Joel was passing down a prophecy to the Israeli people, to the nation of Israel. Okay? You see, here Israel had turned their back on God. They had, their focus wasn't on what God wanted for them. They weren't abiding by his rules. They weren't abiding by his laws. And Joel comes along, and there's other prophets that Obadiah was probably the first one to talk about it. And they refer to Israel as either the vine or the fig tree. They refer to it both ways. But in Joel's given a warning. He's given a warning to Israel. And he says in Joel chapter 1, he says, "Hear this, you leaders of the people. Listen, all who live in the land in all your history. Has anything like this happened before? Tell your children about it in the years to come, and let the children tell their children, pass the story down from generation to generation. After the cutting locusts finishing eating the crop, the swarming locusts took what was left. And then came the hopping locusts, and then the stripping locusts. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wait, all you wine drinkers, all the grapes are ruined, and all your sweet wine is gone. A vast army of locusts have invaded my land, a terrible army, too numerous to count. Its teeth are like lion's teeth. Its fangs are like those of lionesses. It has destroyed my grapevines and ruined my fig tree, stripping the bark and destroying it, leaving the branches white and bare. So, in John 15, when he says, I am the true vine, he's referring back to Israel. He's referring back to God setting up Israel to be the vine, the way to God, the nourishment that's coming from God, that's feeding out into the land, that's spreading God's word, that's supposed to branch out and produce fruit throughout all the nations. But the problem with Israel is Israel knew the laws. They knew what they had to do. They knew what God wanted of them. But the problem is they didn't produce any fruit. They were not fruit producers. They were nothing more than a tree with a lot of dead limbs, right? And they were meant to be the vine. And Jesus comes along and he says, you know what? I am the true vine. I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. So, what does that mean for us? What does it mean when he says, I am the true vine? And to understand that, you've got to understand how a vine works and what a tree does, right? How many of you understand plants very well? Do you remember high school biology? How do plants get food? Huh? Through photosynthesis. That's how they process it, right? No? Well, yeah, they process the energy from the sun into food. But a tree cannot live without roots or a main branch, right? If the main branch isn't healthy and the roots aren't healthy, the tree's not going to live. So I posted earlier this week about the roots of a tree. And one of the main things that will kill a tree is lack of water. And when a vine or a tree or a bush grows, depending on the climate it lives in and how deep the water is, it has to adapt and either grow its roots really deep, but it has to grow them deep enough to get the water. And not only does it have to grow deep, but it has to grow out. Now, there are some trees that when you pull up the root system of the tree, the root system is actually bigger than the tree itself, right? So in order for a tree or a vine or a fruit to grow, that tree has to have a good root system. It has to have a good base. And it has to not only be able to go deep enough to reach water, but it has to spread out to create that foundation so when the winds come, that tree will remain stable and the vine will remain stable, right? Okay. So here God sets up Israel. He sets up Israel to be the tree, to be the trunk. But the problem with Israel is, Israel didn't set its roots deep enough to get the water. Israel didn't spread its roots out to create stabilization. God came to Israel and he said, okay, here's what I want from you. Here's the rules I want you to live by. Here's the way I want you to live. I want you to not sin against me. Just do as I say, right? But Israel couldn't do that. Israel had rooted itself in self. You see, a lot of the issues Israel had were selfish issues, right? A lot of the sins that go on in Israel and a lot of the troubles that Israel went through were because of selfish issues. They weren't rooted in God. They weren't based in God, and they weren't foundationed in God. So from the very beginning, the main trunk of the tree didn't have a chance. So when Israel has troubles come in, and Israel gets around these other religions and these other things that are out there, and these other sins and temptations, Israel falls for all that because it's not rooted. And so Israel may branch out. It may look like this, but the problem with Israel is, like this tree here, it was fake. Now, there were a lot of good intentions. A lot of good intentions with that tree. But in all reality, the tree was just as fake as this. And God came and he said, look, you were living against what I want you to live with. And he sent prophet after prophet to warn them. He constantly warned them. Even in when they were they finally got out of Egypt, and they went through everything they went through. They seen all this power of God, and they seen what God could do to free his people. What was the first thing they did below the mountain? Do you remember? Moses goes up to the mountain, on top of the mountain. And what did the people do? They took all their gold and they built a calf and they worshiped this idol. First thing, immediately they're sinning against God and doing something that's completely against God. So God warns them over and over again. And throughout the whole thing, he's talking about how I want you to be the vine. I want you to be the tree. I want you to produce fruit. But Israel didn't. And in Joel's talking about the warning of what's going to happen to Israel. You see, the locusts come in. The pride comes in. The selfishness comes in. The issues that they dealt with, the other religions come in, and they're kind of blending into the Jewish, right? And they're taking these idols and they're taking these things from other religions and they're kind of adding them into theirs, or it's kind of like a backup. God says, don't let any other god come before me. Do not worship other gods. But yet they would worship other gods. They would worship the goddesses of fertility and the gods of war. And then if you read the Old Testament, you read what's going on, eventually what happens to Israel? Israel ends up getting destroyed. The temple gets destroyed. Everything that Israel is based on and Israel knows is destroyed. And during the time up until Jesus comes, Israel isn't really Israel anymore. Israel isn't living in the land the way it was supposed to live. It's not ruling the land the way it was supposed to rule. The Romans are ruling. There's other forces that have taken over. And Israel is no longer a nation. It is kicked out. And God said that you were going to be kicked out for this amount of time. You have to be punished. And then you have Jesus comes along. And Jesus says, I am the true vine. You know, and a lot of people miss the fact of what he's talking about here. You see, God wanted the Israelites to be the vine. He wanted them to be his tree, the seed of Adam and Eve that he planted. He wanted it to grow into a nation that loves him, and a nation that adores him, and a world that adores him, and a world that obeys him. And he wanted that stem to come from the line of Israel and to branch out and produce fruit. But it didn't. It died, and it was cast off into the fire. It was cut down. And then you get Jesus coming along, and Jesus says, I am the true vine. You see, what Jesus did, he did what the Israelites were supposed to do. He did what the Israelites couldn't do. See, Jesus came and he lived on this earth. And in his 36 years, 30-something years, he did not sin at all. He didn't sin against God. He rooted his foundation in God. He had a strong foundation. He sunk his roots deep so he could get the water from God, so he could be nourished from God. And here Jesus is saying, I am the true vine. I am solid. I am permanent. I am forever. Unlike Israel, Israel couldn't do that. Because Israel was focused on themselves and their pleasures and their life and their wants and their desires. And they weren't focused on God and God's life and God's desires and God's wants. So Jesus sets this up and he goes back and he's saying, I am the true vine. I am the only vine. I am the one vine. No one comes to the Father yet through me, right? He says these things over and over and over through his ministry. He talks about this over and over and over in his ministry. I don't know if you've ever noticed that a lot of what he says revolves around fruit and vines and trees and seeds. Beware where you cast your seeds, right? Because he does this because this is a powerful illustration. It's a very powerful illustration for us. And it's very powerful to show exactly what it is God wants us to do and what he wants us to be. So Jesus goes on and he says, I am the true grapevine and my Father is the gardener. The gardener, he cuts off every branch of mine that does not produce fruit. And he prunes the branches that do not bear fruit, so they will produce even more. Now, if we're working in a garden and we're working on our tree, sometimes you'll notice that branches coming off of it will die, right? You'll see dead branches up there. You'll see diseased branches. I should have taken a marker and made them look diseased, but you'll have some branches that'll get diseased. And you may have some branches that'll get bugs on them, right? Parasites, funguses, bugs eating them. So what a gardener will do, a gardener will come in, and I wish I had some gardening clips, but these will do. A gardener will come in and he will clip out those branches. The branches that are diseased and got spots on them, or they're dead, they have no life in them, or the branches that are infested with bugs. And we see God talking about this, and Jesus is talking about this in John 15, and I know at times it's hard to get, it's hard to understand. I don't get it. But this illustration, what it shows is that, yeah, we have a loving, merciful God. We have a God that loves us beyond anything. But I think this illustration is a warning, just like the warning back in Joel. It's telling us that if we allow these things into our lives, if we allow these sins to consume us and be a part of our lives, if we allow these insects to feed on us, if we allow this plague to enter us, if we allow this fungus to eat away at us, then you are no longer a part of the branch. You are no longer a part of the vine. You are not healthy for the rest of the tree. You are not going to produce fruit, right? You can't produce fruit if you're diseased, if you got issues, if you got problems. What kind of fruit are you going to be able to bear, right? So he says that the gardener is going to come and the gardener is going to cut those limbs from the vine. I don't know about you, but that's pretty deep, right? And that's a pretty deep thought. And I want to go even deeper in that. In our lives, you see, the Israelites were given tablets, they were given books, they were given oral history on what God wanted. They went to church, and church told them how they should live, right? And they didn't listen to that. And eventually they ended up dying. It's kind of like if we took a YouTube video on how to grow plants, and we watched this YouTube video, and no matter how many times we watched it, our plants still died, and we still couldn't get it right. It doesn't matter how many times you watch that YouTube video, your plant is still going to die if you don't take care of it. You could buy the right soil. You can plant the right seeds. God knows you can buy the right fertilizer, right? And you could try to grow that plant. But if you don't take care of that plant, it's not going to grow. If you don't prune that plant, if you don't watch that plant, if you don't protect that plant. Sometimes you have to spray stuff on it to keep the bugs off of it. Maybe put a net around it to keep the birds and bees away from it, right? And see, Jesus is sitting here saying that I have come to be the true vine. God has sent me to be the foundation that you're to build off of. He sent me to not only be that foundation, but he sent me so that the Spirit can come and live within inside of you and guide you to where you can grow. You see, the difference is you're no longer watching YouTube videos to learn how to grow the plant. You've got somebody with 8 doctorates sitting next to you going, okay, let's do this. Okay, watch this. See that bug? Flick it off. You know? See what I'm saying? There's a big difference between having a video or a book and having a professional there with you. Having somebody who knows how to grow things and knows what you got to do and knows how to interact with the soil and interact with the food and interact with the water and put everything in. So here's Jesus. He's going, you know what? You guys, I'm done with you watching YouTube videos and trying to read the book. I'm moving in. I'm coming in your house, and I'm going to walk you through it. I'm preaching here, people. I don't know about you. That's huge, right? But see, I think the problem comes in is we all know this, right? I mean, I'm not talking about anything that's really all that, new revelation, right? We know what Jesus is supposed to do in our lives. But I think the problem we have is sometimes we find ourselves on a branch of a fake tree. You know, we pay our tithes. We come to church. We're good to our neighbors, right? I say all the right things. I don't cuss. I don't drink. I don't go to movies that are above G. God forbid, I've never seen anybody else naked other than my husband or wife. I don't have impure thoughts. I'm branching out, God. I've anchored myself to you. But the problem is so many people are like Israel. They're not founded on Jesus. They haven't asked Jesus to truly come in their lives and help them garden this plant. They're never going to produce fruit because they're just as fake as this tree, right? Because it doesn't matter what you do on Sunday. It doesn't matter what you do on Monday. It doesn't matter how good you are. Unless you're connected to the true vine, your foundation is weak. You're not getting water. You're not getting sunlight. You're not growing. You're not connected to other limbs that are connected to the same vine that are helping feed the entire tree in order for you to be able to produce fruit, right? You see, this illustration is also an illustration of why church is so important. Why it's so important to be around other people who are connected to Jesus. You see, a tree doesn't just have one branch, right? A tree cannot sustain itself with one branch. Same with a vine. If you look at a vine, vines grow long, right? They'll have their roots over here, but they'll grow long, long vines, and they'll have all these branches coming down, and then the grapes will start growing from these individual branches. But you see, if you take that vine and you trim all the branches off but one, do you think that vine is going to be very healthy anymore? Do you think that branch is going to be very healthy anymore? You might get fruit first year, but it's not going to sustain it. So, like a fake tree, a tree that isn't connected to the vine, a branch that's not connected to the main stem, it's got nothing. It's dying. Will this limb grow on its own? You know how many people I have heard, I don't need to go to church. I can't stand the people in church. They're all fake. They're all backstabbers, gossipers, liars, cheats. So I'm gonna leave the branch and I'm gonna come over here. And I'm going to listen to Mark Driscoll on the radio. I'm going to listen to Pastor Graham on the radio. I'm going to order his sermons and watch them at home by myself on TV. I can have just as much of God by myself and not need any of these people. But if I cut this branch off, can this branch grow by itself? Can it get nutrients by itself? Can it feed by itself? And will it ever produce fruit? You see, Jesus came, and he came to be the true vine for us. And this illustration, a lot of people use it to talk about the producing of fruit. But it's so much more than that. I mean, it's telling us that your entire being, your entire self has to be connected to God in such a way that every step you make, every thought you have, you're so entwined with Jesus that it's what Jesus wants. But you see, a lot of people try to go it on their own. And you can't. You can't. And Jesus goes on and he says, he said, remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it was severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered in a pile, and they are burned. But if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciple. This brings great glory to my Father. So, how do we remain in him? You see, I've got a friend back home that I talk to, and he goes to church every single Sunday. He's always in church on Sunday. But yet, he lives this life that it's purposeful. It's not accidental. It's purposeful. That on Friday or Saturday night, every other weekend, he's out partying. He's out partying and he's doing drugs. And he wakes up the next morning and he says, God, forgive me. And then he gets up and goes to church Sunday. And I know that a lot of us might believe that that's okay. And it's okay because he asked for forgiveness, right? I mean, our God's forgiving, and he says, if you come to me and you ask for forgiveness, you're forgiven, right? But do you think that my friend is living in the vine? Or do you think he's living out here away from the vine? And this isn't just because he goes out and party. I mean, we could go with other issues. How many of you have ever stolen anything in your life? How many of you have accidentally taken a pencil home from work? How many of you have been at your friend's house and eaten something or just reached in the fridge and grabbed it without asking? I mean, they were my friend. I can do that. But technically, if I don't ask them, I'm taking something that's theirs. I'm stealing. How many of you have ever lied? I don't think anybody in this room can say no, right? How many of you have ever murdered somebody? Is there anybody in here who's murdered anybody? What if I told you everybody in here has? You see, Jesus says that if you hate your brother or you hate your neighbor, it's the same as murdering them. If you live with hatred in your heart towards somebody, that's the same as murder. How many of you have ever hated somebody? Or been that mad at somebody that you just hate them? You're angry at them. Some people that they get so consumed in this hatred that from something that happens in their childhood by their father or their mother or somebody that did something to them, that this hatred controls their entire life. I got a girl right now that I've been dealing with for 2 years since I've been here. And she's got that hatred. She's got that hatred towards her father for leaving and never coming back, for abandoning. She hates him. And see, and that hatred has been a seed that has grown inside of her. And like this branch, she has taken herself away from Jesus. She's disconnected herself because of that hatred, and she's dying. She's dying because she's not connected to what's giving her life. You see, apart from Jesus, you can't bear fruit. I mean, how can you be happy over here? You see, the world outside of Jesus, everything they do revolves around self. It's what's going to make me better? What's going to make me more money? What's going to grow my career? What's going to fulfill my desires? But as a Christian, as a real Christian, as somebody that has really given their life to Christ, that is somebody that has really desired to be what God wants us to be, you're connected right here to the vine. And your concern, your cares, your wants and desires serve the needs of the entire tree. Serve the needs of the branch. Serve the needs of the roots. Your purpose is the entire tree to grow, to bear fruit. And Jesus is saying that if you are not serving the purpose of the entire tree, then I'm going to cut you out. My Father is going to come in and he's going to cut you out and he's going to cast you into the fire to be burned because you are useless. You do nothing for the tree as a whole. How many of you, if you went into your job tomorrow and didn't do anything, would have a job for very long? You'd be fired, right? You'd be cast out. You would lose your money, your paycheck, everything, because you no longer served the purpose of your job. You no longer served the purpose of the tree that you were in, right? You no longer served the purpose of the company. So you're cast out. You ran away. And we all get that. We all go to work and we give it our best, right? We all try to perform our best at work. As a parent, what would happen? What would happen if you stopped feeding your children and you just fed yourself? What would happen if you allowed your children just to run and do whatever they wanted and you did nothing for them? You'd be cast out, right? The kids would have to find somewhere else to get that. You would no longer be a family. You would no longer be part of that tree. I could go on and on with these illustrations, but the point I want to make is that there are several different trees that we connect ourselves to in our lives. And for some reason, we can go into these trees and we can give 100% of everything we have to that tree. I can go into my job and give 100%, and I do it every day, and I work my tail off, and I'll work overtime, and I'll do what people call butt kissing just so I can move up the ladder, right? So I can provide and bear fruit within my company. But the one tree that we are supposed to be, are we dedicated to it? You see, our society today, I've been reading, and It's gotten down to, if you go to church one Sunday out of the month, you were considered a regular attender. Did you know that almost every church, some churches are an exception, but the average church, less than 30%, sometimes less than 20% of the people in the church are the only ones giving to the church? They're the only ones that are giving finances to the church. They support the church. Less than 30% of the people in the church. So out of that numbers, if we look around, how many people in our church are supporting our church? I can tell you right now, maybe 3, 2. I mean, we have people that give $5, $10, $20 here and there. But you see, we're supposed to be part of a branch. We're supposed to be part of a tree. We're supposed to be part of God's tree. And we can go to work on Monday and work throughout the week and give 110%. And if my boss calls me Sunday morning, I'm sorry, I can't go to church. My priority is work, and I'm going to go to work because I can give 110% to work. But I stand here and I want to spend eternity with Jesus. I want to worship God. I'm here worshiping, right? Come on, I tithe. But the problem is a lot of us are over here and we're not here. We're not dedicated to Jesus. We're not giving our all to Jesus. We're not giving everything to the entire tree. We're not bearing fruit. I'm not saying this to get down on anybody. I'm saying this as a reality check. Joel came to the Israelites and he came with a reality check and he said the locusts are going to come and they are going to eat everything and they are going to destroy the vines and they're going to destroy the grapes that you're getting drunk off of. And you're no longer going to have that. God is going to come in and he's going to prune you out and you're going to be cast into the fire. You see, the reality is, I don't know about you, but if you look around, the more and more I watch the news, the more and more I watch what this world is going through and the things going on in this world, the more and more I see revelations. The more and more I see the prophecies in Daniel, the more and more I see the prophecies in the Old Testament coming true. We are in troubled times right now. Awful, evil times. And we sit here in America like, it's not affecting me, right? I can go on with my day. It's sad. I hate to see what's going on over there. But see, Wes asked me to do a whole Revelations thing, and that's a daunting task. But if you look at some of it, I mean, the Bible's calling for beheadings. The Bible says this stuff's going to happen. The Bible's calling for major wars and rumors of wars. And I don't know if you understand what's going on in our country. I don't know if you understand that Russia just came in and took over our largest uranium facility. There's rumors of Russia moving missiles back into Cuba. I mean, there's a bigger picture going on here than we could ever imagine. You see, the Old Testament talked about the judgment. The New Testament talks about the judgment. Revelations talks about what's going to happen in the judgment. You see, God wants to renew our world. He wants to renew this earth, and he wants to bring heaven to earth. But he's not going to do that. He's not going to do that for anybody that doesn't live in the tree, that's not part of the tree, that does not serve the purpose of the tree, that does not grow the tree, that does not produce fruit for the tree. right? Why would he want that? He's going to come and he's going to cut you out because you're diseased, you got blight, because you're infested with issues, you're infested with the stuff that you won't get rid of. Because you're not dedicated to the tree. You're not dedicated to Jesus. You're not dedicated to your church. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard for us to give 110% to the church? If I go and do taxes, and my taxes, when I fill out this paperwork, says I owe $600 to the government, what do? You write a check, right? And you send a check off. But if God says, you know what? I'm giving you everything. And not only am I giving you everything now, and I am taking care of you and providing for you now, but from the moment you die, for the eternity, infinite, I want to give you your wildest dreams. I want to give you everything that you were supposed to have. I want you to live forever in me. I want you to have a life that is beyond measure. I want you to have prosperity that you could never dream of. And all you got to do is in this short amount of time, you got to stay with me. You got to stay in me. You got to give 110% to me. And he calls for these different things for us to do, and he calls for a tithe and says, look, I'm gonna give you 100%, and all I ask for you to do is give me 10% back. So every dollar I give you, I just want a dime back. You see, but the problem is we get like Israel, and we're so focused that I did this. I'm the one dedicated to my job, and I'm working my job, and I work 80 hours a week and earn this money. And I have to pay these bills. And this is my money, right? I earn this money. But the realization is we have nothing without God. God gives us everything. And everything we are is of God. And the realization as a Christian is you realize that everything I have, everything I am, is a gift from God. And the reality is that I have a choice. I have a choice. Either I live by the standards that God has set, and I allow Christ in me, and I allow His Spirit in me, and I listen to Him, and I become part of Him. And I do everything I can to produce fruit for the tree. Yeah, you could be rich. Yeah, you could have a nice car. But apart from God, what's that worth? I mean, it's worth something for the 100 years you're here, maybe. It's worth something the 60 years you're here, maybe. But what's it worth after that? For nothing there is nothing other than the gift that Jesus came and died on the cross for that you can take into eternity. But yet as a church, we lackadaisically come to church and we lackadaisically get involved. And the problem that non-Christians have with the church is they're not seeing fruit. Why would I want to be a part of that? You tell me those people are in Jesus and they're in God and they're part of that tree? I don't see any fruit from them. I see nothing but hatred. I see nothing but evil. I see nothing but gossip and rumors and just backstabbers and fakes. Holy rollers, Bible thumpers. The list goes on, right? So you see, this story is so much more than just bearing fruit. Now to bring a positive into this. See, what happens when we stay connected to the vine is that we start to bear fruit. And see, I I showed that video at the beginning to kind of understand what fruit is, right? You see, there's a difference between a fruit and a vegetable. A vegetable doesn't reproduce itself, right? The purpose of a fruit is to reproduce a tree. The purpose of a fruit is to start anew. And it's not to start a different tree, right? So if I take an apple off an apple tree and I plant it, I'm not going to get an orange tree. It's just not going to work. Genetically, somewhere, some scientists might have figured that out, how to make an apple tree turn into an orange. I don't know. I doubt they have. But when we live in communion with Jesus, when we live in communion with God, and we live in communion with the Spirit, and we live in communion with our church, and we get involved in our church, and we start giving 100%, 10% to God, and 110% to our church, and 110% to the mission that God has for us, and the things that God says in His Bible to do, and we give as much attention to that as we do everything else in our lives, what we start to do is, as a church, we can start producing fruit. And that fruit will multiply. And we get to a point to where we're taking people that don't know Jesus, and we're planting a seed in them. I want to show you something that I hope this works. It kind of shows a little bit about how amazing our God is. I saw this on YouTube, and I thought it was the coolest thing. These are just fruit, right? I got an orange, I got a banana, I got an apple. Now I've taken and I've stuck a nail in the orange and the apple, and I've ran a piece of wire into the banana. Okay? There's no other plugins up here, right? And I can take my iPod controller and I can plug it into the banana. What do you think is going to happen? And I can take and I can plug it in. Oh, and you can't see it because I got a crack. I got it broken. But right there is my charging symbol. And you can charge an iPhone from some fruit. From fruit. I'm not plugging this sucker in and charging my iPhone. It is plugged into a freaking banana. Isn't that cool? I mean, I don't know if you understand the power of fruit. I saw this and I was amazed. How can you plug into a banana and charge your iPhone? I wonder if there's any music on here I can download. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and we want to go home. Sorry. I burst into random singing. I think it was because yesterday on my bike, the music was just making me dance. But I wanted to show you this illustration because fruit is so much more. When we bear fruit, when we mirror Jesus Christ, it's so much more than just planting a seed. You see, these fruits connected, they can do amazing things, right? Who would have thought that an apple, an orange, and a banana could power up? I mean, it sounds like a really funky joke coming. This banana, this apple, and this orange walk into a bar. I mean, this shows you how amazing God is. And this shows you the power that's in a fruit. Now imagine that as a church, that we dedicate ourselves to getting into the Word. We dedicate ourselves to spending time with Jesus. We dedicate ourselves to being connected to the vine and being true to the true vine and giving our lives over to Jesus and allowing him to not only control our lives and not only to guide us, but also to become part of us, to transform us, to make us something other than what we are. And can you imagine that as a church, if we came together and connected ourselves as a church to the vine? Can you imagine the fruit that we could produce out of this little bitty church in the middle of nowhere? You see, it doesn't matter if we're a mega church or a tiny little farm church. We could do some amazing things in this world if we just come together and attach ourselves and dedicate ourselves to being a part of the vine. And next thing you know, we affect change in our community. We see people being fed. We see people being clothed. We see people giving their lives to Christ, and people that are no longer a part of drug addiction or alcoholism, and people that are getting past brokenness and hurt and getting over relationships where they've been stomped on, and getting over sexual issues and getting over abandonment issues. And people being able to connect themselves in, and not only are they connected to the tree, but they're producing fruit. And this fruit is spreading out. And can you imagine? This is 3 pieces of fruit. I wonder if I could charge my car if I did 100. Or 1,000. If I connected 1,000, I'm not going to do it. But could you imagine? If just these 3 pieces of fruit can charge my iPhone. What do you think the fruit we could produce out of this church could do in this community? To Harper County, to Northwest Oklahoma, to all of Oklahoma? What do you think the fruit could do just in your own life? What do you think it could do to your children? You see, we all want a future for our children. And a lot of us don't want the future for our children that we chose sometimes, right? Right? We want something more for them. But you see, your children aren't going to get that unless they're eating of the fruit that you're producing. Are you producing fruit that has power, or are you producing rotten fruit? Are you connected to the vine that's producing the real fruit? Dear God, I come to you today and I praise your name. And I thank you for allowing us to be able to come before you, Lord, and to be a part of you. And I thank you for just sending Jesus to become the true vine, to become the main branch that we all branch off of, to be the foundation and the footing and the nourishment for us, God. And I thank you. I thank you beyond everything for thinking about my eternity while I'm so worried about my now. And I thank you for providing for my forever when all I can think about is what I want now. And Lord, I pray that you send your Spirit into me in this church so that we can all connect together to the vine in such a way that we produce fruit that is the most amazing fruit people have ever seen around here. And that lives are changed, Lord, because of the fruit that's being produced out of this church. And Lord, that you infect us so much that we never want to be apart from you. Lord, I thank you. I thank you because at one point of our lives, somebody put a seed in us. Somebody was fruit to us to bring us to you. And I thank you for that, God. And I pray that as we go through the week this week and we get into our jobs, Lord, that you help us to realize that, yeah, in our jobs and in our homes and in everything else, we're given 110%, but we're not given 110% to our church, Lord. And I pray that you will speak to the people in here and you will show them what it means to give 110% to the church, Lord. And what it would be like if everybody here gave what Jesus gave and dedicated their lives to this and dedicated their lives to God. There are so many people, Lord, I pray for, that I know have a high possibility of being pruned from the vine one day and thrown into the fire. And Lord, I pray for those people. I pray for the ones that don't know you. And I pray that at some point, somebody with some real fruit, somebody who is really connected to the vine and somebody who has really been attached to it, can bring a fruit to them and a seed that will bring such immense power that it will charge them to be a part of you, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you just be with us as we go through the rest of this week. In your name I pray. Amen. Thank you guys for coming today. You ready for potluck?